Okay, now we're going to spend some time on completing the square. Now, the good thing about completing the square is that it can be used with anything. It doesn't have to be factorable. It'll tell you whatever you need to know about the vertex and the x-intercepts, and you don't have to rely on factoring methods. So, completing the square, and we draw an arbitrary line somewhere that I'm not pointing to. Completing the square. I'm going to go ahead and say what you have to do first, and then we'll do problems. Completing the square. The first thing you do, of course, with all quadratics, is you set equal to 0. Now, when you do that, you're setting y equal to 0. And remember back from plotting from your graphing days, when y is equal to 0, you get the x-intercepts. Okay, that's from your Algebra 1 pre-algebra days of finding, the x-intercept. You plug in 0 for y. So, or set f of x is equal to 0. Or y is equal to 0. Basically, you're going to get a quadratic equal to 0. The second thing, move C. There's only one place you can move it, to the other side of the equal sign. And add blanks on each side. This is the most important part, number 3. This is where you actually complete the square. Take B, divide it by 2, and square it. And add that to each blank, one on each side. Now, when you do that, number 4, and I'm going to put this in green because this is very important. When you do number 3, number 4, you get shortcut number 1 or number 2 on the left-hand side. So remember those shortcuts? You're going to get the shortcuts on the left-hand side. And number 5, you're going to break off, you're going to do 2 things. You're going to solve for x, and you're going to get the vertex. And then you'll be able to do the rest. Now, later on, we're going to put another step in here. We're going to put another, I'll make it magenta. In here, we're going to put another step later. We're going to call it 2.5, but not right now, okay? So take a minute and pause the video and make sure you write that down. Okay, now I'm going to clear the screen, and we're going to do one. We're going to start off real simple. And they may give it to you like this. They may say, find the x-intercepts. They may say solve, and they'll just give you f of x is equal to x squared plus 4x plus 4. They may give it to you like this. X squared plus 4x is equal to negative 4. They may give it to you like that. Or they may just say x squared plus 4x plus 4. And they say solve. Okay? Whatever the case may be, oops, my bad. Whatever the case may be, you need to set it equal to 0. So that's the 3 possibilities they give you. So I'm just going to start the problem now. And I'm going to go x squared plus 4x plus 4 is equal to 0. Now, some of you have already seen that this is factorable and you can use a shortcut. I know that. I mean, I've got a degree in everything. I know that. The reason I'm doing this is because I'm starting from the basics, okay? And this is a basic trinomial, and you can factor it. You can use the shortcuts on it, get x plus 2 quantity squared, but that's not what we're doing. All right, so I'm going to move C. There's C. So I'm going to move it across the river. X squared plus 4x, and add my blanks. And that is what you're going to do all the time. That's number 3, I think, or number 2. I can't remember which one it is. Now I'm going to take B, which is B right here, that 4. I'm going to highlight it. We'll highlight it yellow. And I'm going to highlight that B, and we're going to go over here to the side, and we're going to go 4 divided by 2 squared is equal to 2 squared, which is equal to 4. And I'm going to write that 4 in blue, because that 4 is what we're going to add to the blanks. Now, as soon as you do that step right there, you have made shortcut 1 and 2 over here on the left-hand side. After you do this step right here, that's going to make shortcut number 1 with a positive right here, or shortcut number 2 with a negative right there. In this case, it's a positive, so it's going to be shortcut number 1, which will give you x plus 2 quantity squared is equal to 0. Now, at this point, we're going to go over to the other side of the page, and we're going to erase all of this. And now we're going to go into the solving side. So I'm going to draw a line right here, and I'm going to bring this right here over here. X plus 2 quantity squared. Now at this point you could fork off and do 2 different things. One is you can find your vertex, equals 0. One, you can find your vertex, or you can put in vertex form. I'm going to show you both, and I would like for you to do both until you understand, what you're doing. To find the vertex, I just take the opposite of both. The opposite of positive 2 is negative 2. The opposite of 0, well, there's no opposite of 0, so you just write down 0. If it was a positive number, you'd write down negative. If it was a negative number, you'd write down positive. So our vertex is negative 2 and 0. Now, what is vertex form? Well, I'm going to put that in another color. Let's put that in burnt orange, because it is something that the homework or the test, whatever the case may be, might ask for. So, vertex form. It's a standard form of a vertical and horizontal shift, which we're going to get into here in the next couple of videos. So I'm going to write this in orange. And I'm just going to put an f of x in front of it. And I'm going to write this equals x plus 2 quantity squared plus 0. Now, if that was a negative 2 over here, you'd bring it over and it would be a positive 2. If it was a positive 2, you'd bring it over and be a negative 2. This right here is what's called intercept form. Or general form, whichever. And that right there is what basically some of your homework problems will want for an answer, or some of your tests might want. It's just general form of a parabola. And in the next section, we're going to cover the vertical and the horizontal shift and all that stuff. Okay, we're going to cover that. And over here, we're going to solve for x. And that's going to give us x plus 2, quantity squared is equal to 0. Take the square root of both sides. X plus 2 is equal to 0. X is equal to 2. That is our our x-intercept. Now in this case, our x-intercept is our vertex. So that means that our parabola is sitting on the x-axis. And that, what tells you that? This right here tells you that. When you have the square root of 0 in your answer, then that means that the parabola is going to be sitting on the x-axis. Now, I'm going to make this a little bit smaller so I can draw and do the rest of the stuff I want to do. So what I'm going to do is make this smaller and move it over here so you can still have it, and move this right there. There. Okay. Now we've done all the algebra. So I'm going to put a line across here like this and here. That's all the algebra. Now I'm going to draw the graph using just the points that I'm given. Now, we all know that C will give us the y-intercept. So this is the y-intercept. 4 is the y-intercept. So I'm going to plot that point in green since I just highlighted it in green. So 1, 2, 3, 4. There's my y-intercept. Now my vertex is -2 and 0. I'm going to highlight that in blue. There is my vertex. So I'm going to do a blue mark for my vertex.
Priority 1 message coming in on secured channel.
And 0. And that's also my x-intercept. So it's a kind of a point that covers both. Now I know, and we're going to go into this into the next section, since this is a 1 and it's positive, we're going to go upward with our parabola, and it looks something like that. And of course from here you'll be able to tell that since we have arrows here, the domain is all real numbers, and we're going to get into that with the vertical and horizontal shifts. So all real numbers, our range is our y values from 0 to infinity. And our decreasing values is from -infinity to 2, -2, and then increasing from -2 to infinity. Now remember, this is a review class. So if you have had Algebra 2 in the past, what I'm showing you right here probably is not new. Okay? And the line of symmetry always goes through the x coordinate, the vertex. So that's x is equal to -2, and that's our line of symmetry. Okay? So this is where we're heading with all of this information having to do with vertical and horizontal shifts and having to do with completing the square. I'm kind of doing it all at one time. Capiche? All right, let's try another one. And this time, we're not going to do a shortcut we're going to do one that's not factorable. So I'm going to erase this one. Right quick, let me let you go ahead and, if you need to, pause the video and you can write as much as you want. Next, we're going to do x squared plus 3x, and I'm going to use 1 and 7. That'll be a -7 equals 0. Now, if you think you can do it, go ahead and pause the video and work on it using completing the square. I've already set it equal to 0 for you. All you need to do is complete the square. Okay, had to respond to that email. All right, so here we go. I'm going to move that c, x squared plus 3x plus blank is equal to 7. Oops, no, we don't need to do this one. We need to change this one. I'm sorry, I don't want to do this one yet. I'm going to make that a 2, and that 7 will be okay. I think that 7 will be okay. So we're going to change this one, sorry. 2x, 2x, there we go. And we move that 7 over, and that's good, make blank right here. And now I'm going to take half of 2, and I'm going to do this in red because this is very important. So 2 divided by 2, that's where the 2 comes from, raised to the second power is equal to 1 raised to the second power, which is equal to 1. So I'm going to add that 1 here and there. And now I take my green highlighter or green pen, and we have shortcut number 1 right here. And it's shortcut number 1 because that's a plus. So that's going to give us x plus 1 quantity squared, and that's going to equal 8. And now we're going to go over here. That was pretty simple. Now we're going to go over here. I'm going to make this a little bit smaller. Well, it's not going to let me. There we go. I'm going to make this a little bit smaller. And that was pretty simple because we didn't have to do much because of the 2. Anyway, I'm going to put that over here. We get x plus 1 is equal to 8. And I'm going to go ahead and do the vertex over here. So here's my vertex. And then I'm going to put in vertex form over here. And then we'll solve over there. And what's the opposite of 1? Negative 1. What's the opposite of 8? Negative 8. And that is your vertex. Remember, you take the opposite of both when you're just finding the vertex. To put in vertex form, you do f of x is equal to x plus 1 quantity squared minus 8. Remember I told you to bring that over? You bring this over when you put it in vertex form. And you take the opposite of this and you just bring this down and you get negative 1 and negative 8 for your vertex. Now I'm showing you this because there's 2 ways you can find your vertex. One, you can just take the opposite of both numbers right here, or the homework or the test may ask you to put it in vertex form and you have to do it that way. Okay, so that's how you find the vertex. Now we're going to solve. Take the square root of both sides, and x plus 1 is equal to the square root of 8. Now, I'm going to talk to you, this is called the discriminant. And I called it the radicand a while ago because I wanted to wait until we got to this point. The radicand and the discriminant, the same thing. Just discriminant is a contextual term for the x-intercept. When you take, and I'm going to write it over here to the right, if you take the square root of 0, that means 1 x-intercept. If you take the square root of a positive number, that means 2 x-intercepts. And if you take the square root of a negative, that means no x-intercepts. Okay? That's what the discriminant tells you. So at this point, you know I've got 2 x-intercepts because I'm taking the square root of 8. Another thing, an exact answer, if the directions ask for exact, that means you're going to leave the radical in the answer. If it asks for approximate, that means you're going to use your calculator to calculate the square root of 8, or whatever the case may be. So make sure you make that note that whenever you're asked for an exact, I'm going to leave it exact and then estimate when I draw the graph, because I don't really, it's not that big of a deal. So I'm going to take the square root of 8, I'm going to say 2 times the square root of 2, because that breaks up into square root of 4 times the square root of 2, and that's 2 times the square root of 2. So I'm going to do x plus 1 is equal to positive or negative 2 square root of 2, and then x is equal to positive or negative 2 square root of 2 minus 1. Now, then you would type that in your calculator, and you would get the points needed to plot on your graph. I know that 2 times 1.4 is 2.8, so I'm going to do this by estimating. X is equal to positive or negative 2 times 1.4 is 2.8 minus 1, and then positive 2.8 minus 1 is equal to 1.8, and negative 2.8 minus 1 is equal to negative 3.8. So they're estimating, that's the estimating right there with a little dot. Okay, that's not exact, but now I can draw my graph. So now I go and I highlight everything, and hopefully it will no, it's not going. I'm trying. And group, and move this over, and so there's everything I just gave y'all, and I'm going to draw the graph right here, and my x and my y-intercept up here, we're going to take our handy dandy highlighter, and I'm going to highlight, there's my x-intercept, I meant y-intercept, -7. So I'm going to take my blue marker, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There's my y-intercept. My x-intercepts are 1.8, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So 1.8 is going to be right in there, and negative 3.8, 1, 2, 3, 4 is right in there. And my vertex is -1, -8. And there is my parabola. And of course, I got arrows here. So that means as far as the x goes, the domain, I can plug anything into this thing. My range is my y values. My y values are going from -8 to infinity. Decreasing, my x values, is -infinity to your vertex, which is -1. And then increasing from -1 to infinity. And our line of symmetry is x is equal to 1, -1. And that's your line of symmetry. And that's how you do completing the square with x is equal to 1, or a is equal to 1 right here. When a is equal to 1, That's how you do completing the square. So we're gonna shut her down right there, and then on the next video we will do when A is not equal. Well, no, we need to do some more on this one. We need to do, I'm going to pause the video right now and we'll come back to it and we'll do some more. Okay, I've decided that I'm going to move on and go ahead and continue this video, and we're going to do another type problem. And this type problem will have a odd number in the middle to where you're going to have a fraction. So let's go with x squared plus 3x minus 7 is equal to 0. I don't know why I put a blank there. 0. Remember, you said equal to 0. I'm going to move C. X squared plus 3x plus blank is equal to 7 plus blank. And now I'm going to do completing the square, and I'm going to do it in red. 3 divided by 2 and square it is equal to 9/4. And that 9/4 is going to go here and here. And this is going to give us shortcut number 1. And that's going to give us x plus 3/2 quantity squared is equal to, and I'm going to change this to 28/4. And you should know where that comes from. And 28 plus 9 is 37/4. So at this point, I can do my vertex. My vertex is negative 3/2, comma, negative 37/4. And my vertex form is f of x is equal to x plus 3/2 quantity squared minus 37/4. Okay, so that's all that. Now I'm going to come over here and I'm going to solve for x. So x plus 3/2 quantity squared equals 37/4. I'm going to take the square root of both sides. We know we have two x-intercepts because we're taking the square root, we're taking the square root of a positive number, so we know at this point we do have two x-intercepts. So that's going to give us x plus 3/2 is equal to the square root of 37 over 4. I'm sorry, 2. And x is equal to the square root of 37 minus 3 over 2. And the square root of 37, you can't break that into radicals, so you're either going to leave it the square root of 37, but I'm not, because I'm going to plot this. So x is equal to positive or negative 6.1, with 36 being the square root. 36 is near 37. 36 is 6, so it's just assuming 37 to be 6.1 minus 3 over 2, and that's going to be 6.1 minus 3 over 2, and negative 6.1 minus 3 over 2. 6.1 minus 3 is 3.1. Half of $3 is $1.50, so I guess it's going to be $1.55. Negative 9.1, that's $4.55, so that's going to be negative $4.55, something like that. So there's our two x-intercepts. Now, I'm going to make all this small, so you can still freeze the screen if you need to, or do whatever you need to. Group. And there is all the algebra. take my handy dandy graph, and my vertex, well, my y-intercept, let's go back and find the y-intercept. The y-intercept is, I'm sorry, the y-intercept is -7. So I'm going to take my blue marker and I'm going to do -7 on the y-intercept. And our x-intercepts, we'll do that in magenta. There's our x-intercepts. So we'll put one at 1.55 and put one at -4.55. And then our vertex is -1.5. We'll do that in green. -1.5, be right in there. And then down -9.25. And our vertex and our parabola is going to look something like that. And since we have arrows, my domain, which is my x values, is all real numbers. My range, which is the only thing that is y, that's equal to -37 fourths? 37 fourths to infinity. And then that's a bracket because you actually do include 37 fourths. Decreasing from -infinity to -3/2. And then increasing from -3/2 to infinity. And of course your line of symmetry goes through -1/2. X is equal to -3/2, and that's your line of symmetry. So far we've done a couple where x is equal to 1. We've done one that you have a fraction. And now we're going to do one where x is not, or a is not equal to 1. And that's where we throw in that extra step. So let's go ahead and do that. And I'm going to use a negative because that way you'll see that there'll be a negative. If it's a -1, like -x² plus 2x minus 8 is equal to 0. This is a -1, so you would have to factor it out just like if it was -2x² plus 2x minus 8. Okay? These right here are not a is equal to 1. Okay? You've got two problems here. That's -1 and this is -2. You cannot do completing the square when a is not equal to 1. A has to equal +1 for you to do completing the square. A has to equal +1 for you to be able to complete the square. If a is a negative, if a is a fraction, if a is a 2, you got to factor out whatever will make it a 1. So in this case, you would factor out a -1, and in this case, you would factor out a -2. But how do you do that? Well, let's go back to the original right here. No. No. Oh well, I guess I didn't. I must have erased it. Dadgummit, I didn't mean to erase it. Okay, there's a spot. First of all, you set equal to 0. 2, you move C. And you add the 2 blanks on each side. Okay? After that point, you should have right here number 3, but this is going to be number 4 now. Number 4 is complete the square, b/2 and square it. And remember I told you that we're going to put in another step here when a is not equal to 1. And that step is factor out a not equal to 1. And when you factor out a is not equal to 1, the right side blank will have to be multiplied by whatever you factor out. Okay? So I'm going to go with and we'll try to do both of them, okay? Or I'll just make up another one for the second one. Now I'm going to pause the video and you can rewrite this, and of course the rest of it's the same. When you have a -1 or a -2 out front, or a 1/2 or a 1/3 or a +5 or a +107, okay, if there's anything in front of that x squared besides a +1, you're going to have to factor out whatever it is. And then you can complete the square. So I'm going to erase all of this. And I'm going to do the way you're supposed to do it. So, -1x squared plus 2x plus blank is equal to 8 plus blank. Now I'm going to color this -1. I'm going to color it magenta because that does not need to be there. That -1, or the negative, needs to come out. So I'm going to color it magenta because I'm going to factor it out. And I'm going to factor it out right here. And then I'm going to rewrite in black. That's going to be x squared minus 2x plus blank is equal to 8 plus, now I got to, whatever I factor out here, I've got to multiply it by this blank. Now it's very important that you understand that. Now, a lot of people say, well, you didn't factor out over here because this is 0 right here. Okay? This is 0. This right here is 0. This right here is 0, technically. I haven't completed the square yet. And when I do complete the square, it's going to affect this side. Okay. So now I complete the square. So I'm going to do this in red, just like we did before. 2 divided by 2, square it, is equal to 1. I'm going to put a 1 here, and I'm going to put a 1 here. Now everything's the same. So my magenta -1, I pull out front. And now I do shortcut number. Oops, I'm sorry. Trying to do all these colors for y'all, and the left side of the board's not wanting to cooperate. There's my shortcut number 2, because it's got a minus sign right there. So that's going to be x minus 1 quantity squared is equal to 8. And what's -1 times 1? Minus 1. And now we have -1 times x minus 1 quantity squared, and that's equal to 7. And now you have the same thing, but this -1 tells you that now the parabola, this negative right here tells you that the parabola is now going concave down. That's what that negative tells you. So you know that before you even sketch out your graph. So I'm going to put here's my vertex. I'm not going to do the vertex form. I think y'all know how to do that now. My vertex is equal to 1, -7. There's my vertex. I'm going to go over here and I'm going to solve it. So -1 x minus 2 quantity squared equals 7 divide by -1, divide by -1, and I'm going to highlight this in red. You know I never do this, but that is going to be a negative number, and you can't have a negative number in the radical. So therefore, x minus 2 quantity squared is equal to -7. And of course, you get here, you can't do that, so you got to write it in terms of I. Now, if you're taking this Algebra 2 review, you have seen I before. I is the square root of -1. So I'm going to write that up here. I is equal to the square root of -1, and I squared is equal to -1. So you need to write that down, because I'm going to rewrite -7 in terms of I. We know that we don't have any x-intercepts. No x-intercepts, because you can't take the square root of a negative number. So at this point, the discriminant, -7, is telling us we don't have any x-intercepts. So I'm going to finish x minus 2 is equal to the square root of 7 times the square root of -1. And x minus 2 is equal to I times the square root of 7, because this is I. And x is equal to I times the square root of 7 minus 2, or -2 plus I square root of 7. So we know whenever you see that I there, you know there's no x-intercepts. So when I draw this thing, I know I have a y-intercept of -8, and I've got a vertex of 1, -7, and we know it's opening downward. So our all real numbers is the domain. So domain is equal to all real numbers. Range is equal to -infinity to -7. Increasing from -infinity to 1. Decreasing from -1, positive 1 to infinity. And of course, the line of symmetry is x is equal to 1. And that's how you factor out whatever is keeping you from having a is equal to +1, you've got to factor that out. So we're going to do one here in just a second, and we're going to factor out a -2 or a -3. So let's go ahead and do that. -2x squared plus 3x minus 2 is equal to 0. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to move the 2 over, and I get -2x squared plus 3x plus blank is equal to 2 plus blank. Now, when you do this, you're having -2 plus 3x plus blank, and that -2, let's highlight that -2, and when we highlight the -2, we know that that -2 has got to be factored out. So let's highlight that with a red color, because we've got to factor out that -2. And when we factor out the -2, that means we're going to have to multiply the right side blank by a -2. So that means I'm going to factor out this -2 in red, and I'm going to factor it out. And that will leave me with x squared plus that 3/2, that positive 3/2 is going to be a negative. So I'm going to make a red negative, and I'm going to color that 3. We'll color it there, and then I'm going to put that 2 up under it, so you'll know that that's where that 2 comes from. And then that's going to be x plus blank is equal to 2 plus, and then we got to multiply that -2 that we factored out times whatever that blank is. Okay, now the reason we had to factor that -2 out is because we have to have a 1, positive 1, before we can actually do completing the square. We can't do completing the square unless we have a positive 1 in that area or in that place for A. So now we have to do completing the square. And completing the square, we're going to take B, -3/2. We're going to divide by 2 and square it. Now, I changed that 2 to a 2/1 so you won't get confused. And now we're dividing by a fraction. So we're going to multiply by the reciprocal. And we get -3/4. And square that, we get 9/16. Now, it's very important that you write down what I just did, because students really mess this up, okay? First of all, they take the 3 out, okay? They take the 2 out, they factor that out, and then they just automatically think that they've completed the square. No, 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 no. You've got to take 3/2, and I didn't mean to write that negative. It doesn't matter that you put the negative in there, because anything squared is going to be positive. So you're always going to come out with a positive number. So with that being said, we have to take the 3/2 and we have to divide by 2 and square it, just like we've been doing. So this is completing the square. Something else students try to do. They try to do completing the square before they factor out the -2. You can't do that either. That's why I put the step in where I put it in. You've got to do the factor out. You've got to factor out that -2 first. That's got to be first. And then you complete the square. You've got to remember that, because you're going to be doing a problem like this on a test or homework, and you're going to get all bum-puzzled, and the reason you're going to get bum-puzzled is because you tried to complete the square before you factored out that -2. Now we're back to square one, and take our green highlighter, and we have shortcut number 2 right here. So now I'm going to keep that -2 out front, and I'm going to rewrite parentheses x minus 3/4 quantity squared, and then that's going to equal, and I've got to do some adjusting over here because I got a fraction. So I'm going to go over here and I'm going to use a blue pen, and I'm going to cancel. This is 2/1, so I'm going to cancel that 2 and make that an 8. So I've got -9/8. So that's going to change this into what? 16/8. And now I've got 16/8 minus 9/8. And that's going to give me a final rendering, whatever you want to call this, of -2. And then we've got x minus 3/4 quantity squared is equal to, and 16 minus 9 should be 8. I mean, no, I'm sorry, 7. So that would be 7/8. And now you're back to where you've been being with finding the vertex and finding the x-intercept. So I'm going to copy all of this, and we're going to make it a little bit smaller. And of course, it only grabbed half of it. So let me go back and try to grab all of it. There. And we're going to make that small. And that'll be there. Put it there. Put it up there. Okay. Now, let's go ahead and finish. So I'm going to divide. I'm going to go ahead and get my vertex. My vertex is equal to 3/4, comma, negative 7/8. That's my vertex. Now let's solve it. Negative 2 times x minus 3/4 quantity squared is equal to 7/8. Now I already know I don't have any x-intercepts because when I divide through by this negative 2 over 1, I'm going to multiply by 1 over 2, and that's going to give me x minus 3/4 quantity squared is equal to negative 7 over 16. And I'm going to take my red marker, and that tells me, that negative right there tells me no x-intercepts. My determinant, I'm sorry, not determinant, my discriminant tells me no x-intercepts. Now, I don't need to write it down now, but I'm going to go ahead and write it down because no x-intercepts. Okay? Why? Because when I take the square root of both sides, bing, that's not going to work. So I'm going to do x minus 3/4 is equal to the square root of negative 1 square root of 7 over 16. And that's going to give me x minus 3/4 is equal to I times the square root of 7 over 4. And then x is equal to I square root of 7 plus 3 over 4. Now I'm ready to draw my graph. And if I'm ready to draw my graph, I'm ready to draw it. And that means I'm going to have my y-intercept of negative 2. So that means 1, 2. And I'm going to have my vertex of 3/4. 3/4 in the positive direction. And negative 7/8 is almost negative 1. And we know it's going down because this says that it's concave down. The negative 2 says concave down. And now we can do our domain. Domain is all real numbers. Range is, that's your y values. Negative infinity to your vertex of negative 7/8. And then your increasing values, increasing is from negative infinity to 3/4, and then decreasing from 3/4 to positive infinity. Your line of symmetry always goes through the x, so line of symmetry is x is equal to 3/4. And now you have everything from completing the square, you have all that, you found your vertex, you solve for x, and you solve for x, you're either going to get the square root of a positive number, which means 2 x-intercepts. You're either going to have the square root of 0, which is 1 x-intercept, or in this case, the square root of a negative, and that negative is not good. That means no x-intercepts, and you know that's how it comes out. And that is how you complete the square. Now, I can tell you this, you have to know this, and you have to be able to do them. So make sure you know how to do completing the square. If you don't know how to do completing the square, then you probably need to take Math 102 or Math 110 because you do not know what you need to know in calculus, because completing the square is important for your calculus.